I'm going to say about Dr. Lindsay that some of you know my son is a dog trainer, and he lives next door to me, and he said, "Oh, Mom, I just trained a dog for this lady. You've got to meet her." And she is a scientist, and she's against, I can't say she's against vaccines, but she knows all about vaccines. And he and I have been through all of that these few years. So I said, "Well, would she speak for us?" And he said, "Yeah, she speaks everywhere." So long story short, she is here with us tonight. And I think most of you have seen the bio that I attached to the flyer. And if not, let me send it to you, because most of the things in there I can't even pronounce, let alone, and certainly don't know what they mean. So it's very scientific. And I'll let her tell the rest. But she does have two daughters. One is a senior in high school.
One's a senior and one's 14, two girls. Oh, right. They're amazing. Yep, my husband and I are very blessed.
They are. So, and you live in Sealy? Yes. So she's probably going to have a lot more to tell you. So,
okay. My name is Dr. Janci Lindsay, and I am a toxicologist and molecular biologist with over 30 years of scientific experience. I got my PhD in molecular biology and biochemistry at the University of Texas Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences. Now it's also called GSBS MD Anderson Cancer Center. They've kind of pushed them all together. I went straight into toxicology research after I obtained my PhD, and I worked for a consulting company who had some very large clients in the pharmaceutical space and also in the agricultural chemical space. And I worked mostly for defense clients in going through the science of all of their lawsuits and looking at the mechanisms for injury that were plausible or possible, or what they could defend against and what they couldn't defend against. And a lot of those were mechanisms of cancer, what caused cancer. Before I went to graduate school, I worked in a reproductive biology lab right out of college. And in that reproductive biology lab of Dr. Bonnie Dunbar, I helped to develop a contraceptive vaccine that was meant to be a rival to the pill and to be temporary. Unfortunately, it ended up causing permanent sterility and ovarian destruction. Right after that, Baylor College of Medicine sued for the patent. And my boss bought a lovely place in Africa, the Karen Blixen Ranch in Africa, the old coffee ranch. If any of you have seen Out of Africa, that's what she purchased with her settlement. So that was a real cautionary tale for me. This was a peptide vaccine in that we took a small portion of a protein on the outside of the ovum called the zona pellucida. We only took 15 amino acids from that, and then we used that as the immunogen. And then we did something called blasting, where you put the linear sequence of the protein into a computer program, and you then try to blast the linear sequence against any other linear sequence of a protein in your body. The problem is that proteins don't exist in linear sequences in your body. They exist like a crumpled up rubber band. And they have edges that may be 100 amino acids apart, touching another edge right there. And that is the epitope that ends up binding and maybe causing the cross reaction when you try to fool with Mother Nature and decide to start injecting little peptides and proteins and things into the human body that should not be injected. So, cautionary tale leads forward several years. I get my PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology, which is the study of DNA, RNA, and protein. I'm doing cloning in the lab. I'm learning about transgenic mice. I'm working in transgenic mice. We were able to reverse pulmonary fibrosis by lowering adenosine levels, which was remarkable. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And right after that, I went into toxicology consulting, and I was having a great time as a toxicology consultant. After working for a large company for a few years, then I started my own practice. Everybody knows who has their own business, it's always better to work for yourself than to work for somebody else, especially if you like to sleep in the morning. And you're a night owl like I am. I routinely stay up after midnight. So flash forward to COVID. All of a sudden, we start getting a lot of propaganda. And that propaganda goes something like this. We have this brand new mRNA vaccine, and it is not a gene therapy. Okay? Any nucleic acid that you inject in the body or give to the body or deliver to the body that causes the body to produce a protein that it would otherwise not produce is a gene therapy, okay? By definition, it has always been a gene therapy. And gene therapies have been around for over 30 years, actually closer to 40 years. And they were used to treat very specific genetic diseases, mostly diseases of inborn errors of metabolism, where there was no cure, the person was going to die without this treatment or having to get a very expensive protein treatment. So they would give the gene therapy. What was the risk of the gene therapy? What has been known about the risk of gene therapy for 30 to 40 years? The risk is cancer. The risk is something called insertional mutagenesis, where the DNA from that gene therapy will insert itself into the human genome and bump over the reading frame so that the proteins that are produced are not the correct proteins, but mutant forms of them, or those proteins which are essential for cellular life are not produced at all. Or they sit above an oncogene and drive the expression of an oncogenic protein, or they bind or inhibit a tumor suppressor. So these are the ways, a few of the ways that gene therapies can cause cancer and why they were never brought to market large scale for anything. Now, in this talk tonight, I told Norma, I said, what usually happens is I talk for a long time and then nobody gets to ask questions. And so I didn't want to do that tonight. So I actually put parts of 3 talks together, and I'm going to stop after each section, and I want you to ask questions. So, the many lies that sold the COVID gene therapy to the world. 1, the COVID vaccines are not a gene therapy. Again, yes, they are a gene therapy. And the fact that they still lie about this, even though in the manufacturer's SEC filings to their investors, they call them gene therapies, and they warn that if people find out they're gene therapies, that they could lose some money or be stopped by the FDA. Another lie, these shots will stay in the arm and don't go far from the injection site. Well, we found out that wasn't true. They go all over the human body. And a very brave man, Dr. Byron Bridle, who's working at the University of Guelph up in Canada, was the first one to publish the Pfizer biodistribution study. That was actually Pfizer's study that they had to submit to Japan in order to get regulatory approval to deliver the vaccines there. And what that biodistribution study showed was that the lipid nanoparticle, along with a piece of mRNA that was not specifically the one being tested, but they just looked at the distribution, went to all organs of the body, went to the brain, went to the bone marrow, preferentially went to endocrine glands, went to the ovaries, and went to the testes, preferentially. Okay? When they told you it stayed in the arm, it does not stay in the arm. Lipid nanoparticles are designed to bypass cell membranes. And as a fatty lipophilic substance, they like fatty tissues. Ovaries have a lot of nice little fat in them, so do your endocrine glands. Okay, modified synthetic mod RNA from the COVID vaccines breaks down rapidly in the cell and is natural No, no, no. The inventors of this technology, Kariko and Sahin, said in a paper in 2008 that this technology could cause mitochondrial toxicity. If you substituted the natural nucleosides with these synthetic modified nucleosides and they replaced every single uridine with a pseudouridine, a synthetic uridine, it gets stuck inside the mitochondria and it causes mitochondrial toxicity. But it lasts a long time. And that's what they wanted. Well, when you couple something that's non-natural that takes a long time to break down with a lipid nanoparticle that protects it from the body's immune system that would normally attack it and degrade it, then you get a very long-lasting mRNA, modified RNA. But that wasn't it. Along with the modified mRNA, a third of the Pfizer shots and the Moderna shots are actually DNA. They are DNA plasmids, and they should not be there. And they lied about the presence of these plasmids, and they told people that it was just a contaminant. But a contaminant is not present at a third of the shot as nucleic acid. That's not a contaminant. That is an adulterant. Did they remove these from the shots? And have they, since this was revealed to them through my colleague Kevin McKernan's testing over 2 years ago? No, they have not. They have not removed them. And I'll tell you why in just a little bit. So the other lie, the COVID genetic vaccines or spike protein cannot enter the nucleus of the cell. Guess what, folks? We found out early on that they definitely do enter the nucleus of the cell. And in fact, the spike protein, the gain-of-function spike protein, yes, it is a gain-of-function spike protein, binds P53, which is a protein very important in suppressing cancer. Okay, so now it's not working. The spike protein, the mRNA and the DNA goes to the nucleus. They've traced it. Pfizer knew this early on. They had immunofluorescence studies that they submitted along with their packets to all of the regulatory agencies, to the FDA, to the EMA, to the TGA, to all the other global regulatory agencies. So these regulatory agencies were all in on hiding the truth from not only the American people, but from the people around the world. And let me tell you, when we went to these agencies and we asked them specific questions, or when news agencies asked them specific questions, they all came back with the same response. It was like they had copied verbatim from each other. All right, so COVID genetic vaccine mRNA cannot be reverse transcribed to DNA and integrated into the genome. Here's something really important that I want to tell you folks. Even if they say they are going to clean up these mRNA vaccines and they're not going to have DNA in them anymore, it doesn't matter. Because we have enzymes called reverse transcriptases that reverse transcribe the mRNA to DNA. And where are those especially active? In the ovaries and the testes and the bone marrow. That's where those are especially active. So don't you believe them if they say, oh no, we're going to take that DNA out. The mRNA is going to be just fine. It won't be. It will be reverse transcribed to DNA, as has already been shown several times. There is no DNA in the vaccine which could change your DNA. Well, I've told you there is. Up to a third of the material in these shots is actually plasmid DNA. And that plasmid DNA is designed to change your DNA. You know why? Because they added something called SV40 nuclear targeting sequence. They took a specific 72 base pair nuclear targeting sequence from the simian virus 40 virus and engineered it into the plasmid. The only reason for that 72 base pair piece is to take it straight to the nucleus along with its payload. That is what it is engineered to do. And when Pfizer submitted their map, their plasmid map of what their plasmid looked like, their spike plasmid, to the FDA, they conveniently left out that it had this element in it. It was missing, but to do that, they would have had to actually go in there and remove it because the annotation software that they used would have automatically put it in. So that means they not only lied, but they erased something that would have already been put in there. And yes.
To law school so I wouldn't have to learn what you, I went to law school so I wouldn't have to learn what you know. Anyway, my point is, I can't make this thing work.
Yes, I can hear you.
What in real terms does this problem have? What effect does this have for real people?
So the effect that it has for real people is that they inserted something to cause cancer in these on purpose and they're hiding it from you and they're not taking it out. That is the real effect. This already caused millions of cancers when they put it in the polio vaccines back in the 1950s. Okay, so in the 1950s, they had simian virus 40 virus that was contaminating, adulterating the polio vaccines. And every person who got those shots between, I think it was 53 and 66, were given shots that were contaminated with the SV40 virus, which has been shown if it's injected into rats or mice or really any animal will cause tumors. So there's a very good book by Judith Very Baker, who is actually the lover of Lee Harvey Oswald. They worked together in a laboratory on a cancer vaccine. You may not have known this. The cancer vaccine was designed to give Fidel Castro cancer, and it had SV40 in it as an element to incite the cancer. She and Lee Harvey Oswald, along with a couple of other people, worked in a laboratory for the CIA. And there, again, it's a great book. There's Me and Lee by Judith Very Baker. And then there's another one, Dr. Mary's Monkey by T. Ed Haslam. His father worked with Dr. Mary Sherman, who was another doctor that worked on this project. Anyway, very good reading. Yes, Judy's great. Mm-hmm.
30s or 40s when the first polio vaccine.
No, it was after the Cutter incident. So the Cutter incident was in the mid 40s, and that was a big embarrassment when they failed to sterilize the polio virus properly with heat or with chemical treatment, and they actually gave everybody that got that round polio. Yes. So they're... Yeah. So I didn't get the sugar. I actually did not get the polio vaccine until much later. But I know they were giving it on the sugar cube instead of the oral polio vaccine. That's also what's still being given in Africa now by the Gates Foundation, although it's a different formulation. And I'm going to say it real quickly because I have a place to say it right here. At some point in the last 20 years, they started growing all of our vaccines on aborted fetal cells. I did not even know this until I went to research it for some litigation that had to do with the COVID vaccines. Now, there is no reason to grow any of our vaccines on aborted fetal cells at all. It creates a huge risk of autoimmunity and of residual DNA from those fetal cells actually being taken up and causing insertional mutagenesis. Again, causing cancers. So it is a real mystery, one, how this got approved through these committees and why they would transition them from other cell types that were less risky over to the aborted fetal cells. Something salient and perhaps pertinent to what's going on now is that these cell lines are from both male and female fetuses. Dr. Teresa Deischer talks about this in a talk that she gave to the Minnesota House. I'm going to provide it to Norma. In 2011, she warned of the risk of insertional mutagenesis and autoimmune reactions in children and babies that were injected with these aborted fetal cells that had residual DNA, because there's residual DNA from these fetal cells that ends up in the shots, some from a male, some from a female, okay? This started over 20 years ago. And that's where I had a chance to say that. I just want you to know that because most people don't know that. With an immunologist who told me that that wasn't true until I showed him. Genetic changes from the shots will not be passed on to your children. This is actually something that I spoke in the U.S. Senate about. I warned that using this type of technology, this gene therapy, it could be passed on to our children. It could corrupt the human genome forever. So once you modify DNA, you can permanently modify it, and it can be passed on to your children and then passed on to their children and corrupt the human genome so that the children born in the future are not healthy and they develop cancer. I was able to speak on Senator Ron Johnson's committee back in 2022, and that's the main thing I warned of. Right now, myself and a few other scientists have gotten full approval to do a study to look for DNA integration in sperm. No one else is doing it in the entire world that I've seen, and it must be done. I tried to approach scientists at Baylor College of Medicine and at UT to beg them to do these studies. At BCM and their reproductive biology lab, I begged them to do these studies. I used to work in that department. Absolutely gaslit me. They still have not done these studies. There are hundreds of thousands of reproductive biology labs all over the world. Not a single one of them has looked to see if these gene therapies are integrating into sperm or into ova. Mm-hmm. So there may be a connection to transhumanism with them pushing the mRNA platform and the gene therapy platform so much. Of course, if they want to change our human genome, one way that they could do that is through gene therapy. There's really no logical reason to use mRNA as a vaccine. It doesn't work. It didn't work with the COVID vaccine. In fact, I don't know if you guys know this, but the more COVID shots that you get, the more likely you are to get COVID. It actually causes a depression of your T cells. Your T cells are the cells that are important for not only starting the antibody response in your B cells, but you also have T cells that fight off all other infections, and it is depressing your T cells and causing an immunosuppression, essentially a vaccine-induced AIDS. They call it VAIDS. You may have heard that. Mm-hmm. We're doing it privately.
If you can wait for the mic, that'll be great so the rest of us can hear your question.
Yeah, so she says that Peter Hotez, and I don't even call him Dr. Hotez because he doesn't deserve it. He's a maniac psychopath. Seriously. I don't know how he's still employed by Baylor College of Medicine. I've asked them several times to censure him, to remove him, because he is absolutely spreading false and lethal information about not only vaccines, but about the COVID vaccines. And even going so far as to tell parents that there is no risk of cardiac harm from the COVID vaccines. Most people at this point know that there is a very real risk of cardiac harm. It is actually listed on the label for the COVID vaccines that myocarditis is a known risk, especially in 12 to 39-year-olds. 12 to 39-year-olds are the main target for the myocarditis and heart damage, all right? It's not the older people. It's 12 to 39-year-olds. And that's why you're having kids falling over dead. Since when were heart attacks and strokes normal in our youth?
How about the monoclonal, or however you say that, that they gave to several of us?
The monoclonal antibodies seemed to work very well, and then they got rid of them, didn't they?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Why does it focus on that age group? What about it that hones it in on those age groups?
So that's a very good question. And some of that may have to do with the fact that we see this happening a lot in our elite athletes. It's something about the conductive nature of the heart at those ages, and the conductance is getting disrupted. Now, early on, you may not have known this, but the gain of function COVID virus or virus-like particle, depending on what it may have been, was originally isolated from rabbits over in Stockholm that were infected with I just lost my train of thought. Not gonorrhea, but syphilis. And so these rabbits, they tried to figure out, they started to get a cardiopulmonary disease, and they would die very quickly from this cardiopulmonary disease that involved both the lungs and the heart. And they isolated the COVID virus from that. And that is what Ralph Barrick started publishing on in the 1960s, along with Dr. Small, who was a veterinarian. So they've been working on this since the 1960s. I just want you to know. And they knew very early on that it would cause cardiopulmonary disease. They also knew that if you had either strain of the common cold virus 229E or OC43, that you were protected against that coronavirus, because they would inject the rabbits and see if they injected it with either of those strains, if they would get the cardiopulmonary disease, it protected them completely. So we heard early on in the COVID pandemic that there were many people that already had antibodies to coronavirus. And it was indeed from being protected because they already had gotten OC43 and 229E many times in their life, and that protected them. So that a large part of what everybody went through, and I'm not saying it was innocuous, because for some people it was very, very serious. But a large part of what happened was the way that they handled the pandemic. They did not treat properly. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Maybe I'm being a little naive here, but isn't this the kind of thing that our president could take like a dog and a bone if he knew about it?
So the president, while I think he's doing a lot of really great things, I think we can all agree on that. He has known about the issues with this, all the problems, the lethality, the miscarriages, the ability to change the genome from the very beginning, because we told him. He's known about it for a long time, and he's not backing off of the fact that these are the greatest things ever. In fact, you heard that he wants to couple mRNA with AI. I don't know what to say about that other than don't count on one person to save you from a plan that's been rolling forward for many, 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 many years. So there are lots of patents that have been in place for a very long time for these. Okay, the shots only cause a creation of the spike protein, no other proteins. It's very important to know that in addition to the spike protein, these shots code for many, many, many other proteins. And why? Because the mRNA is completely broken. So you think you're getting a big piece of the big spike protein, but you're getting little tiny peptides of many, many, many other proteins. And it's different with each person because they break differently in each shot. All of this can cause autoimmunity, and has. I don't know if anybody has seen the pages and pages and pages of side effects from these shots. It's over I think it's 2,790 diseases that are caused as a side effect from these shots. That's one of the reasons why. We know the COVID shots don't prevent the contraction and transmission of COVID. And then there was a lie, there are no other existing safe and effective treatments for SARS-CoV-2 or for the coronavirus. Well, we know that that's not true. At the time that they said this, they accidentally still left up Table 2E in the NIH appendix for treatments for SARS that listed both ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine as effective treatments for SARS-CoV, which I put in a report for Dr. John Witcher, who lost his job. He ran for governor of Mississippi. He lost his job because he refused to not treat his patients with ivermectin. So he lost his job. The COVID shots are effective at preventing death and severe disease from COVID. No, the COVID shots actually make you prone to blood clots, prion disease, Creutzfeldt-Jacobs, heart attacks, strokes, blood clots. Did I say blood clots? Pulmonary embolism. Has anybody seen those rubbery white clots? Okay. That the embalmers were passing around that they're pulling out of people. So I had some of those, and I had some of them stained. If any of you are physicians or nurses here that would like to see pictures of them, they're full of inflammatory cells, mostly neutrophils. It's a very strange substance. It looks to be a type of fibrin. We're not sure. It's very elastic. If you pull on them, it's like a rubber band. It's been described as a fibroamyloid type deposit. Other people have done more extensive investigations. I just looked at the basic histology and looked at the cellular architecture and then tried to do some staining with Mason's trichrome for collagen. There's a lot of collagen in there. Collagen and fibrin. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hello. Okay. I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Casey and Callie Means, who is working with Robert Kennedy, and they're really pushing this. But one of the things that came from some of those conversations with Robert and Tucker was, and I wanted to know if you concurred, all of this is nothing more than to create lifelong patients, people who are sick. And they're not treating a holistic approach. They're just treating one thing at a time to create this lifelong patient.
100%. Doctors don't make money off of healing people. They only make money on keeping someone sick. If they were incentivized to get a bonus for healing people or for having as few patients as possible in their practice after treating a good number of patients, that would be what the goal would be, to actually have a good healthcare system. We have a sick care system. It was abominable to me that Pfizer had a cancer commercial in the middle of the Super Bowl when they have actually caused a massive number of cancers with their own shots. It's disgusting. So the COVID shots do not shed or harm others. Dr. Helen Benoon actually published, I guess 2 years ago, on the case of a 7-year-old child in France whose parents had just gotten their second booster shots. She ended up having a stroke a few hours later, a 7-year-old child. We now know that these do shed. They do shed because they are plasmids along with the mRNA. They're DNA plasmids. Now, what happened, or one of the papers that helped us understand this was a paper about a lab worker in Seattle that was working with some COVID plasmids just for research. She accidentally got them up her nose. They infected the bacteria in her nose. Plasmids infect bacteria. Plasmids allow for bacteria to live in different environments like hot or cold or different pH. It changes the DNA of the bacteria to adapt to any situation. And they've been exploited by molecular biologists for 60, 70 years in order to clone in different genes that we want. In these plasmids, there are antibiotic resistance genes for kanamycin and neomycin, and people are being transfected with these antibiotic resistance genes for those major classes of antibiotics that are used. Neomycin is used all the time. Kanamycin is a leading treatment for tuberculosis. What do you think is going to happen with all these people coming from other nations that carry tuberculosis? And then we've got all these antibiotic resistance genes that prevent us from being effectively treated for tuberculosis if we get tuberculosis. Could be a real problem.
One question. The age 12 to 39
Yes.
is the range for your most reproductive potential,
Yeah, absolutely.
and
Yep.
also military.
That military is the other, yes. Military is what we thought of first when we thought of that age range. Why hit the young ones? But if you want to really get a picture of how these work, go to www.openvaers.com. www.openvaers.com. There you'll see a tab. It'll say reproductive, mortality, cardiac. If you go to the myocarditis tab, it'll show you that for each successive shot, it hits a different age group. So for the first and second shots, it hits the younger generation, and they're more likely to get myocarditis or die from just the first shot. Just the first one. With successive shots, it hits successive age groups. So with the fourth or fifth shot, the older people are more likely to die. But it hits the young people first.
In bringing in an elite controlled government like communism, you
Yes.
must reduce the resistance
Yes.
of your subjects.
Yes, I absolutely believe that there is a global coup to bring in global communism, as has been talked about by some members of the Council on Foreign Relations and Club of Rome. The only way to control a large populace in their mind is to do it through communism and severely restricting people's freedom of movement and a highly surveilled populace.
Okay. I have
That
a
goes on into to politics, but it's all wrapped up in this. It truly is. Okay, so we already covered that they're gene therapies. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I can make these slides available. Again, I kind of pulled in slides from some other talks to have 3 different talks. Of course, yeah. Okay.
Okay. You probably halfway answered it because you said there's something like 200 diseases that have been spawned off of this. So a lot of people were getting shingles after they.
That almost 3,000 diseases.
Oh, 2,000 and 3,000. Okay. But shingles is one of them that was spawned
Shingles
off?
is one. Yes, shingles is one
Yeah.
of the adverse effects that has been reported after receiving the COVID vaccines, as is herpes. And all kinds of other reactivation of latent viruses.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah. Because your immune system's depressed. And that's what happens when your immune system is depressed. Okay, I already said, why did gene therapies not make it to market in over 30 years? So this paper is really good. Accident and desire, inadvertent germline effects. Germline is your eggs and sperm. In clinical research. And in that, this ethics professor, Dr. King, who's on the DNA advisory board, says, we keep talking about the risk of corrupting the gene pool and how dangerous it is. The first people that received gene therapy were sterilized. Did you guys know that? They sterilized them because they were so worried that they would pass that gene therapy on and it would corrupt the gene pool. Now look at what they're doing, giving these shots to pregnant women. You should never, ever, ever take a shot while you're pregnant. Never. It is not, I don't care what they tell you, how it's going to protect your baby. It doesn't. Your immune system is already not working properly. It's overactive in some ways, underactive in other ways to tolerate the baby. You do not want to mess with your immune system while pregnant. And especially with the COVID shot, if you go to that openbears.com and you go to the miscarriage,
I have a question.
yeah, and the reproductive tab, you'll see that miscarriages and stillbirths just skyrocketed.
I have a question. Can these so-called vaccines cause high blood pressure?
Well, they can cause all kinds of things. They can cause angiotensin changes, which can lead to high blood pressure. But there's a list. If you just Google it, if you look up list of adverse effects from Pfizer, you'll see that there's 2,700 and something listed side effects, and it goes over like 20 pages, and they're alphabetically listed. It's pretty easy to find. But there's all kinds of things like autoantibodies to sperm, prion diseases like Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, heart attack, stroke, things like that. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Gene therapies were never meant to be used mass scale. They were only meant to be used where the risk or the reward was worth the risk. And the risk was always developing cancer, lethal sepsis from massive autoimmune complications. The Jesse Gellinger story is about that. Look up Jesse Gellinger. He was one of the gene therapy patients where he developed massive autoimmune organ sepsis and died. Yeah. Okay. So I should have that down. So new studies find that the COVID genetic vaccine integrates into the human genome and are replicating. This was one of the more startling findings, and I don't know if you guys know about this or not. But in cells in the lab, we were able to put the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines on the cells, and the cells do take up the DNA, and it is being integrated into the human genome. The cells are ovarian carcinoma cells and breast cancer cells. And both of those cell lines took up the DNA, it integrated into the DNA, a reading frame mutation. And this occurred on chromosomes 9 and 12. So yes, in the lab, in vitro, in a dish, when you put the vaccine on cells that takes them up, it does change the DNA. That same study also showed Dr. Kevin McKernan, I say doctor, he doesn't have his doctorate, but he's very intelligent. Kevin McKernan showed, along with Ulrike Kammerer, I should have put the names up there, that these plasmids can also replicate in mammalian cells. So what they did with these plasmids that they added to the shots, and I'm going to say they added them to the shots on purpose, they gave them a mammalian origin of replication. Now, why were the plasmids in the shots in the first place, according to the manufacturers? So they told everybody that you were going to get shots that were made on a synthesizer, and it would be able, you could do this very quickly and scale up. Well, they weren't actually able to do that. It was too expensive. So they decided to make them in a very cheap way by growing them in giant vats of bacteria, E. coli bacteria. And they exploited this plasmid. It was supposed to make copies of the mRNA, and they would purify it out by using the antibiotic resistance genes. The only plasmids that took up the DNA that they want copied would grow in kanamycin and neomycin, and that's how they selected them out. So it's a long process, but they should only have a bacterial origin of replication because they're only supposed to be replicated in bacterial cells, right? No way that they can replicate in your cells. So remember when they came out with the self-amplifying vaccine and people are going, no way, I don't want that self-amplifying vaccine. Well, you already had it if you had the COVID vaccine because they have a mammalian origin of replication and those plasmids are able to replicate in both your bacterial cells in your gut, E. coli, right? Also the cells in your body. Any cells in your body, these shots can replicate in. So It's also now been shown, Kevin showed by screening a colon cancer biopsy. And let me tell you this, the people that are doing this research, they are not your academics that are getting paid millions of dollars, receiving millions of dollars through the NIH. All of our academic colleagues, all of my old academic colleagues put their head in the sand. You know what they told me? They wanted to collect their retirement. They didn't want to rock the boat. They wanted to keep their grants. Well, they had to keep their graduate students in their labs. So they did not stand up and tell people the truth that these were gene therapies. They let the people be lied to. They let the people be told that a vaccine was better than natural immunity. What immunologist lets people be told that a vaccine upon which it's modeled after natural immunity, for God's sake? That's what a vaccine is. It's supposed to model natural immunity. Now they're telling you that it's better to get a shot than to have the immunity itself? No, that's crazy. But these people will not do the research, will not write a grant. You can't publish a paper about any of this stuff. Okay, so there's only a few researchers in the whole world even doing research on this. And guess whose money they're using? Their own. I spent our retirement, our savings, on trying to get permission through a formal IRB so everything was above board to do this study in sperm. We have no savings, but it's that important. It is that important. Steve offered a long time ago to help with stuff, but he's helped with so much stuff, he's broke. We're fine. We paid for it. We're going to be collecting some money to pay someone who's working in a lab in Canada. So if anybody wants to donate for that, so that he can actually be paid to do the work instead of doing it for free. He's got a family to support. That would be great. My husband works. I'm not the only person that works in my family. So, we're okay. But I want people to know that there's been a lot of allegations of grifting. We paid for our own plane tickets. We were sometimes reimbursed by people, but most of the time we were not reimbursed for hundreds of dollars of hotel rooms, for, flights across the country where we went and spoke. We did not get reimbursed. No meals reimbursed, nothing. We weren't reimbursed. But it was the right thing to do. Okay, so this is, so he showed in a cancer biopsy, Kevin showed in a cancer biopsy that the SV40 sequence was there from the Pfizer vaccines. And this guy had been given 4 shots and died shortly thereafter of a very aggressive colon cancer. The problem now is he can't get it published in the peer-reviewed literature because all of the journals have been bought. Yep. Okay, there we go. So this is what I was talking about with the plasmid maps. Up here, if you use this particular software to annotate your map, plasmids are circular pieces of DNA. It will automatically plop that SV40 that's right there, promoter, in there. It labels it by itself. So when Pfizer disclosed their map to the EMA, the European Medical Administration, and to the FDA, they left out the SV40 sequence. Well, we confronted the FDA and the EMA and the TGA about the SV40, and now they've spun it around to say, oh, no, we knew it was there. It doesn't do anything. But they're all responding in the same way, like lockstep. I don't know if you've heard this approach, Rockefeller lockstep. They are all responding with exactly the same verbiage, and it's absolute nonsense. Do you guys know what the Smith-Mundt Act is? So the Smith-Mundt Act was an act that forbade propagandizing of U.S. citizens by the government. And Obama repealed it, yes. During Obama's administration, he repealed it. So now it is legal for the U.S. government to lie to the American people. It is legal for the mainstream news to lie to the American people. And that's one of the reasons why you're being lied to. To get to the real bottom of this, you need to ask yourself, why are you being lied to? 10 potential ways these genetic vaccines can induce cancer or more. These are several of the ways that the genetic vaccines, people get upset when I even call them vaccines, the genetic shots, the gene therapies, they're not vaccines, can cause cancer. And sorry, the one on the bottom's a little hard to see. I don't know if they can make that any smaller on the screen. But if you want to take a picture, you can. And again, the slides will be available. We've gone over a lot of these. Okay, so the next part of this talk. How many of you are aware that they are giving these gene therapy vaccines to the things that you eat? Lives, yes. Yes. Yep. You're informed. You're very informed. That's good.
I watched the High Wire. Have you been on High Wire?
Yes, the High Wire is great. Yes, yes.
Children's Health Defense?
I have not been a guest, but I have contributed to many of their shows through sending things to Jeffrey Jackson. Yeah.
Everything that you've talked about, I've known since January of 2020 when Dr. Francis Boyle talked about this and that it was lab created. And then Dr. David Martin he made Pandemic 2 with Mickey Willis, talking about all of the patents. I mean, this was developed by the Department of Defense many years before COVID actually came out. And I was specifically interested in what you said about shedding, because my husband and I in 2020 were taking the quercetin, the vitamin D3, everything to prevent it. And we were fine. Everybody else around us was getting it. All of our children got it, but we didn't get it. But then all of our children, I tried to talk to our friends at church, do not get the vaccine. And I talked about antibody-dependent enhancement, and it just went right over their heads. And they said, well, if I don't get it, my doctor will be mad at me. And so when all of our friends at church got vaccinated and all about the same time, my husband and I got COVID and both ended up in the hospital. And my husband had had it for so long that he no longer, he already had the antibodies, and they didn't give him remdesivir, but they gave me remdesivir, 5 doses of it, and put me in kidney failure. I almost died. Both of us almost died.
I'm not surprised. Yes, remdesivir causes kidney failure. Sorry, remdesivir does cause kidney failure. It's a failed Ebola drug. Fauci helped develop it, and along with, I just forgot the manufacturer right now. I'll think of it in a minute. But it was never shown to be effective. The studies were actually cut off short in order to try to fight Gilead, in order to try to show false effectiveness. It caused so many cases of kidney injury and damage that the WHO recommended against it as early as the fall of 2021. There was a 39-fold increase in kidney damage over that. They expected 9 cases of kidney injury based on what was known. They got 138 cases reported into the VIGI database. Now, most people don't even report into just like VAERS, most people don't report. So they had 138 cases versus 9. And so they openly recommended against it, yet it was the singular treatment and still is the singular treatment given to patients in the US today, along with financial incentives for the doctors and the hospitals that use the remdesivir and opiate. It's remdesivir, opiates, and benzodiazepines. Okay, so the remdesivir causes kidney toxicity, which causes your lungs to fill up with fluid. Then they give you a benzo opiate cocktail, which depresses your respiration while your lungs are filling up on fluid. And then you go into the stage where you need a ventilator because your oxygen is now low. And once you're on a ventilator, then it's pretty much over for most people. And then these hospitals were reimbursed up to like $375,000 per patient, plus a 20% bonus if they died at the hospital from COVID. So we have another arm of the, I have the We the People 50. Stop the Shots, WeThePeople50.com, 50. You can go and look up the Stop the Shot campaign, but it's headed under the Former Feds Group. And the Former Feds Group is headed by Brad Geyer, a former federal prosecutor that's helped a lot of the January 6 clients there. And also, they've worked on the Humanity Betrayal Project, which are the stories, the thousands of stories of the people that died in hospitals and that were tortured in hospitals, especially if you were unvaccinated.
Question.
Yeah.
Question over here in the back.
Where?
Back here.
Sorry.
Wasn't because of all this problem with Remdesivir, hasn't that been pulled off the market?
No. It's still being used in hospitals today. Mm-hmm. No, he did not. He took monoclonal antibodies. Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, so they're starting to give the mRNA shots to cattle and to chickens. They've been using a different mRNA shot in swine against a type of influenza that infects swine since 2021, and they didn't tell anybody. Okay.
Wasn't that created in the lab?
Pardon?
Wasn't that swine flu created in the lab like everything else?
The swine flu that is out now is most likely a gain-of-function swine flu, yes.
And so is the
In
bird
fact,
flu.
I think Dr. Peter McCullough had a really nice article on that the head of a lab in Georgia, I believe, a USDA lab, was working on that very same strain. And that's one of the places that they did detect it first.
May I
Let's see, where are we?
May I ask a question?
Yes, where's that coming from? It sounds like you're right next to me when you're speaking because of the way that the sound travels. Okay.
Do you have to have any insight in how we get around big pharma to get the legislation to stop this? I've also heard that they want to put mRNA in all of the vaccines that are given to our children, and I'm petrified of that.
I would recommend now, and I do this as a former vaccine developer, to not give any vaccines, take any vaccines going forward, either for yourself or for your children. And there's two reasons for that. One, and I'm going to make this very simple, if the government's trying to kill you, it's not a good time to take anything that they have to offer. Okay? I mean, that's really simple. The second thing is that now we have enough studies showing that unvaccinated children are actually much healthier, have less disease, less ear infections, no autism. Do you guys know that autism went up from 1 in 10,000 cases in the 1980s to 1 in 34 today? That is alarming. 1 in 34 children will be diagnosed with autism. And maybe it has to do with the fact that back in the 80s, the kids got 6 shots and now they get 72. And they're grown on aborted fetal cells. Again, right now there is robust evidence to feel safe that if you don't take vaccines or your kids don't get vaccines, they are actually healthier than the kids that do get vaccines. So this is not having to play Russian roulette and go, oh gosh, I hope they're going to be okay because I'm not giving. We know from the studies they're going to be okay. There's enough people over the years, enough cohorts that did not vaccinate their children, and we have the data from those cohorts.
Another question back here. I got the mic.
You can definitely get exemptions from the state of Texas. You do not have to give your children or your kids going off to college the meningitis shot. You do not have to do that. You can go on texas.gov, just Google vaccine exemption forms, and you can get vaccine exemption forms. Now, am I anti-vax? Yes, right now I'm very anti-vax because they lied to us about all these things. Had they actually been safe, had they actually been needed and effective, of course I wouldn't be against them. Who would be? Right? but they're not safe, they're not needed, and they're not effective. So why would you use something? I mean, we're at 72. Is 90 going to be when we stop? I mean, where does it stop?
I have
For what
another
we give
question
these
back
kids?
here.
Yeah.
Is the mic working? Yes. You said there's a lot of studies that proving that unvaccinated children are safer than vaccinated.
Yes.
Where do we find the list of studies? Because I have a son that's in the medical field, and he's very, I want to know no, he's not either way. He just wants to know all the documentation, all the medical papers. Where do we find those?
The Children's Health Defense website. Look up the Children's Health Defense website. RFK used to administrate it or oversee it. There are many, many, many articles on that site. You want to look for articles by Dr. Brian Hooker. Turtles. Yeah, there's also a book called Turtles All the Way Down that discusses several of the studies. And there are doctors that took in that lived in certain places like the island that I grew up on, Vashon Island, where a lot of people didn't vaccinate. They were real hippies. They just didn't believe in it. And so these doctors lived in those places where people it was in vogue not to vaccinate. And so they have generations of these kids that grew up to adults and they don't have chronic heart disease. They don't have, no cardiovascular disease, no Alzheimer's, no cancer.
Miss Janci, everybody, we need to get through her slide, and she'll be here to answer questions. Come on, let her get done. We have a lot of questions, I know, because this information is terrifying that we have been lied to, but let's let her get through it, okay? Yes, we will have a video so you can refer back to it, okay? But let's let her get through, okay?
Yeah, so right here, these are some of the results of giving animals genetic vaccines. So, of course, you can have the insertional mutagenesis. You can have an increased risk of cancers. You are not supposed to eat meat from animals that have cancer. But this is being allowed now. The plasmid genetic sequences can bind to tumor suppressors. From eating the meat, it can cross your gut barrier and then transfect you and then bind P53. The plasmid mRNA can be reverse transcribed, as I said, increased risk of cancer. Genetic vaccines can be passed to offspring if present in the testes or ovaries. The genetic vaccines can shed to meat workers, posing a risk of non-consensual transfection. Oh, I was interrupted in the middle of the lab workers in Seattle that were working with the COVID vaccines. They infected the bacteria in their nose, but they took it home and infected their family. Okay, so we know that they can be passed. Let's see, genetic vaccines can enter the environment and soil bacteria. These can not only infect E. coli, the origins of replication that are present in these allow it to infect any bacteria. So you can imagine the sewage from people that have taken these or animals given these, which happens all the time, right? You hear about all kinds of lawsuits from people suing over the chicken farms and the hog farms from the sewage getting into the soil. Well, now you're infecting all of the soil bacteria. And what is the downstream consequence of that? Or all the other animals that feed off of each layer of the bacteria, and then there's the insects, and then there's the spiders, and then there's the mammals. So this is a catastrophe that this is being done. And there is absolutely no safety studies being done for these. This is the other thing that's just horrific. They're using these gene therapies willy-nilly, and they're saying, well, we don't think it causes a problem, but they haven't actually done the studies, just like with the COVID shots. So the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. Just because there's not a study, especially if the journals won't publish them, that says if something harms you doesn't mean that it doesn't harm you if they don't publish the study. So these, the next couple slides are from my colleague Sasha Latipova. She's an amazing regulatory specialist who did a lot of research on this for some bills that we tried to get passed. Whoops. Let me go. Uh-oh. Now I'm going back. So these are the different types of vaccines that are used. If you want to take a picture of the slide, they're using them in your pets, the vaccines they give to your pets. Rabies vaccine does not need to be given more than once in an animal's life. It does not need to be given every year, by the way. 2005 Apex IHN for Atlantic salmon. So the salmon that you get in the store that is not the wild salmon, that is not wild cut, the farm raised salmon, they are genetically vaccinating those salmon and trout. Don't eat it. Sequevity in swine, yep, they've been using it since 2021. And now the latest thing that they're doing, and this is what brings in the climate, is that they've decided that there are too many cow farts in the world and it's contributing to global warming. So now they're giving a genetic vaccine to cows to keep the methane emissions down. It keeps them from farting so much. Yes. So this is obviously really ridiculous. And I'm sorry, that's not Bovar isn't a genetic vaccine, excuse me, but it does cause problems with fertility. So in the rats that were given Bovar in the studies, they had a reduced ability to get pregnant and to have offspring. And that is being given to cows now when they're financially incentivizing these farmers. They're giving these farmers money to give their cows Bovar. And it's a real grift. So the risks to the human genome are not properly studied in all of these, obviously. I'm just going to go through this really quick because it's a little bit of more difficult stuff to conceive. Okay, so when they allowed for genetic vaccines to be used in fish, I should have put the other study up there too. They did so because one study in mice showed that the genetic vaccines were gone by like 20 days. But when they actually tested them in fish, like what they were going to be used for, they persisted in the rainbow trout here for 320 days. Definitely went past the point of when they would be farmed and be on your table. They still had the mRNA in the muscle. So stay away from this stuff. Stay away from anything that's farm raised. Shrimp too, the shrimp that you see in the store, the farm raised shrimp, buy wild caught shrimp. The farm raised shrimp is also given those vaccines. With the Sequevity vaccine, I want to reiterate that there is no real reason to give these vaccines. They don't help, just like the COVID vaccine. In fact, the lethality of the Sequevity vaccine for pigs was so great. It was so great. 30% of the animals died. Yeah. Let's go back to... Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Oh, where's it going to show? There. Yes, so, nope, I guess I'm missing that slide. It might come up later. They might have gotten a little reorganized. So there's no real, why would you as a pig farmer use a vaccine that caused 30% lethality in your livestock? It doesn't make any sense. So they're trying to get these in us one way or another is basically what I'm trying to say. So be vigilant. There are several states that have, we've helped write bills for states. Unfortunately, I'm more active in other states than I am in Texas because I don't have a lot of help in Texas. So if you guys want to help and really get involved on the political side, that's what we're lacking. I don't have time to do it all myself, to put the bills together and be the grassroots effort to get the shots pulled here, to put bills forward in Texas that bans this in our food. I do it for other states because a lot of the work is done for me, and then I just have to speak and then help write the bill. But it's embarrassing to me that I've done more work in other states, mostly northeastern states, but all over the country than I've done in Texas. It's quite sad. So, but I'm going to be letting you guys know with wethepeople50.com what we can do locally to go to our counselors. And it's called the Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates. And we used it really effectively in Idaho, where we were able to get local council members to ban the shot for their counties. Okay, that is the power of your local council members. So if you can get us in front of your council, if you can get us in front of your, but you have the right. You have the right. You each get 3 minutes. If you get 3 minutes and you get 3 minutes and you get 3 minutes and you get 3 minutes, then we can come up with enough time to give the talk, and it can be videotaped and it can be sent out to the rest of the people. And that's how it worked in Idaho. They can't prevent you. They cannot prevent you from talking. They're trying to do that in Washington. They're actually, Washington State, my old home state, they're trying to even allow us or prevent us from being allowed to speak. They're trying to ban anti-vaccine rhetoric, they call it, from even being able to be discussed at council meetings. Well, of course, that's crazy. You have to be able to discuss any type of medicine, I mean, anything at a council meeting. So this is going to get into the really crazy part of this whole operation, the PrEP Act. The PrEP Act, so these vaccines are actually, these genetic vaccines are not authorized by the FDA. They are Department of Defense vaccines that are authorized under emergency use authorization through the PrEP Act. And if you go to 21 CFR 360 BBB through 3A, 21 CFR 360 BBB through 3A, you will see that there is a whole list of things that you do not have to do for these shots. So under the PrEP Act, unilateral powers were delegated to the HHS secretary, who used to be Becerra. It's about to be Kennedy, thank God. Through emergency provisions that are unconstitutional and have no oversight. So the first thing is a power to declare a public health emergency is not defined or based on any actual emergency. It can be a future concern. I have a slide of all of the things that we're under a public health emergency for right now, and you will be shocked. You just have to say, I think this might be coming in a few years to open up the grift. And the grift is that as soon as you declare a public health emergency, it opens up the flow of money from the federal government into all these contractors to make tests, to make vaccines, to do all these studies. And it's the military-industrial complex splitting into vaccine development. And so now it's the medical industrial complex. And the things that they cause, they are now coming in and buying up the cancer companies, buying up the cardiac care companies, developing new drugs to treat cancer, to treat the heart disease that you've developed because of their original product. It's a very lucrative field. Under the PrEP Act, the power to detain and quarantine U.S. or foreign citizens in pre-communicable asymptomatic state without due process. Right now, on the books, it is legal for them to come to your house, say, I think you're sick, and take you to a quarantine detention center. I know it sounds crazy, but right now that is what's on the books. Federal. The power to order the EUA experimental untested medical countermeasures be used on U.S. citizens that may be adulterated, misbranded, and not subject to good manufacturing practice. Okay, why were these shots left on the market once they found out they were contaminated? Why? Because they're under EUA, and it says so right on the FDA webpage. FDA does not regulate these shots. I spoke to Keith Peden, Dr. Keith Peden, at the FDA. He said they were DoD products. They did not have the right to test them, while they were telling everybody else that they had purview over them. Under EUA, you do not have to follow good manufacturing practice. Anything could be in there. They can be adulterated specifically. Go to 21 CFR 360 BBB through 3A. One of the first things it says is that they can be adulterated and they must be licensed. They could put poison in these shots and the FDA has to license them. It specifically says the FDA will not approve them. Okay? And so they can be misbranded. Comirnaty being called something else, right? We never got Comirnaty. That's misbranding. They can be mislabeled. Well, that's actually a better example of mislabeling, where they have the wrong label on them. They can be misbranded, saying that they're useful for something they're not useful for. Adulterated, misbranded, and mislabeled, and the FDA must approve them. All of these shots that are out right now, including remdesivir, are under EUA authorization, which means that they can all be adulterated, misbranded, and mislabeled and not go through good manufacturing practice. Would you use anything, any medication, any other medication that was allowed to be adulterated and sold to you as safe? How do they know it's safe? They're not using good manufacturing practice. How do they know? They can't guarantee it's safe. They don't have to. What about, would you buy a car from a car manufacturer that refused to accept liability for the damages? Because that's what's going on with this whole program. Everybody from the marketer, the manufacturer, the distributor, everybody is indemnified. The pharmacies. Why do they have pharmacists giving all these shots now? And people at McDonald's, they're all completely free of liability according to the PrEP Act and that Code of Federal Regulations that was changed in 2016. Okay? That's why they're doing it. Going back to the childhood shots, there is no liability for the manufacturers for harm caused from those shots. And it is extremely hard to be reimbursed for any damage. And if you are reimbursed, you might get a few $1,000s or at most $350,000 to treat a child with severe autism that takes millions of dollars worth of care. So if you wouldn't buy a car or another consumer product from a manufacturer that won't stand behind them, why would you inject your kids with something that the manufacturer won't stand behind? And it's the same with these. I think we're getting to the end here. I'm sure we're running out of time. So these are the current PrEP Act declarations, all right? These are all the things that we're in the middle of a pandemic for right now, guys. Monkeypox, smallpox, orthopox, declared January 1st, 2016. It goes all the way to December 31st, 2032. Okay? Viral hemorrhagic fevers declared January 1st, 224, all the way to December 31st, 228. The nerve agents, the Zika virus, you can see the end dates on these, and you can see that most of them were put in place or re-announced on January 1st, 2023. Okay, again, it opens up the money, opens up the floodgates. If you declare a public health emergency for these, you can put any products used to treat them under emergency use authorization, which means you can make this as a manufacturer. You have no quality control that you have to worry about. It's not required. The FDA doesn't get to review it or look at it, but they have to put a rubber stamp on it. What a win-win. And the U.S. government pays you for it. So you're a manufacturer. The U.S. government pays you to develop your product X. You have no liability. You don't have to have any good manufacturing practice. You could put corn syrup in there and say it's something else. Seriously, you could, because they can be adulterated. Or you could put cyanide in there, because they can be adulterated and there's no good manufacturing practice to check and see if they're okay, right? What is to prevent you from doing any of that? Nothing. What a great business idea. Then the government buys it back from you again after they already paid you to do the research to develop the product. Then they're going to buy it back from you again to give to the citizens. What a great business model. Then a couple of years later, once people start getting the disease that your product has caused, you can buy up the cardiac care or cancer care pharma companies, just like Pfizer did, just like Moderna did. I hope you're starting to get an idea of the horrendousness of what is going on and what has gone on. Yeah, so these are the powers that the HHS secretary has to declare the public health emergency for a pandemic that is actual or perceived to be a threat in the future. This encourages the manufacturer of medical countermeasures to that agent with complete liability for any harm. The government subsidizes the manufacturer for producing this. We just kind of went through this. The government also purchases the MCMs from the manufacturer for use, and the profit goes back to the manufacturer. Taxpayer pays for it, no liability. Profit is most realized when the emergency is declared that requires the use of or mandates the use of the medical countermeasure. So it's just like the military-industrial complex in wars, basically. Yeah. I can't hear you. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm.
To Robert F. Kennedy, and he works for Peter Thiel in Raytheon.
Yes.
So doesn't the deputy, from what I've read and from what I understand, doesn't the deputy secretary have more power because he's going to be Kennedy's?
The deputy secretary does have a lot of power. They can step in. So there's only one way to bring liability back on the manufacturer, and that one way is if you can prove willful misconduct. But guess who the person is? Willful misconduct. Only willful misconduct, not fraud. No, willful misconduct. There's one person, two people that get to make that determination. The HHS secretary and the deputy secretary. But if they're the ones that are declaring the corrupt fake pandemics, do you think that they are ever going to say that there was willful misconduct? They would indict themselves.
So, and I have another question, a follow-up question to that. So if Trump has, he wants to make Jim O'Neill the deputy secretary, and there's going to be a hearing on that, how do we as citizens call our representatives and say, no, we don't want him?
That's more in your ballpark than mine. Being a part of this group, being a part of this group, you probably have a lot better. People call, people write letters, people have meetings. We try to do it all, but I can't. Just like people asking me to step out and speak on the whole mind control stuff all the time. It's not my specialty. Mm-hmm.
I'd like you to talk about the pneumonia shots, the shingles shots, the flu shots. Robert Malone had a good Substack today about the flu shots, because that's what people this age are dealing with. Judy Mikovits says, no more shots, period.
Yeah, just like I said before, the flu shots are being transitioned over into the genetic shots, the gene-based shots. They're dangerous. They're also starting to grow, or have been growing, the flu shots on the fetal cells for a while.
How far along are the mist vaccines and the mosquito vaccines that they're talking about, where we would have absolutely no say-so about getting vaccinated?
Well, you don't have a say-so if you're transfected by somebody else who's received a vaccine either. You need to keep your immune system strong. We don't know the extent. So I'm talking about things that can happen and things that I believe have happened. strokes and blood clots and miscarriage and people exposed to other people that have been vaccinated when they haven't been vaccinated themselves. Do we have robust studies on that? We're just starting to get some studies. Dr. Jim Thorpe just released a paper today on the huge increase in miscarriages and things like that. The truth is that our regulatory agencies and safety agencies like the FDA and the CDC, who should be doing this work, have clearly been told to stand down. And so who's going to do this work? You can't get anybody to do the work because nobody will publish the work because all the journals have been bought. So I work as an expert witness in the legal world. And if you don't have a peer-reviewed study to support your claim, then it's very difficult to assert that something, X caused Y or such. But all the journals are captured. So then what do you do? We are in a crisis right now, and we absolutely need RFK Jr. to turn it around. But again, I think putting all your faith or hope in one person, as many of you know, he had his struggles in the early days. And when people have struggles like he had, they can be easily blackmailed. And that's what have happened to a lot of these politicians. So I'm hopeful. But Trump not backing off of the mRNA platform and even going further forward, trying to meld it with AI, with Ellison, who's a psychopath, it doesn't give me a lot of hope that if we don't make our voices heard and loudly. And again, I love what he's doing on so many other things, but none of that's going to mean a hill of beans if we aren't alive to enjoy it. So that's kind of where we are. And yeah, again, don't take a shot from people that are trying to harm you. Medical countermeasure, and also until we get this, maybe in a few years, maybe if RFK Jr. does his job and they actually test the flu vaccines and see if they work, right? And they actually develop a shot that's safe and works, well, then you might want to take it. But yeah, I mean, our bodies, I don't know how many of you here are Christian or believe in God, but if you believe in God, you believe that your body, or should believe that your body is made wonderfully and perfectly. God doesn't make mistakes with our bodies most of the time. Now, there are people that have, of course, that are immune compromised, that have different diseases, but a healthy person should not need all this garbage. That's just my thought on that. Okay, so this last thing, in 2023, most people probably don't know that the AGs of Texas and Oklahoma filed suit against the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the president and the DOD, saying that the powers that the HHS secretary had were unconstitutional, and they are. That was thrown out by a Texas judge who was appointed under Bush, who said, no, you're trying to say that it's a state's right to decide and you don't have to go along with the federal government is akin to succession. So, yeah, I agree. And it was not appealed. The date to appeal it was October 30th. They ended up getting new AGs in each position. Paxton was going through what he was going through. We were trying to get him to appeal it, but he wouldn't. We had 2 meetings set up with him, and they were both canceled.
Allowed to act as attorney general.
Yeah, it was a mess.
While he was going through that. Yeah, he wasn't allowed to act as attorney general while he was going through the impeachment. That's right.
Yeah.
How do we get the video or all of the
Information.
If you Google my name too, you can find, and then Norma has some links to other presentations that are I wanted to incorporate different talks that I've given at different times in one talk so that you guys would know what was going on with food, know what was going on with the PrEP Act, know what was going on with the vaccines all at the same time. So I'm sorry if it was a little messy.
No,
but
yeah.
I think from them.
There is a link on the flyer already that has a lot of her videos.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we the people 50.com is The organization that I started with former feds, NCC Blakeman, please go to the website, wethepeople50.com.
Yeah.
Okay,
We've got that on
good.
the flyer, but
Yeah.
we will do it again. We will get it
Okay.
out there.
And I can let you guys know too, things that are happening in our group. I can give Norma updates to give
Information.
to you. When something's discovered or something's done, like I said, we're waiting on pins and needles for the approval from the ethics board at one of the universities that's doing a portion of the study. Of course, they could always decide that it's too high profile, being the first study of its kind. So I contacted another ex-colleague today to just say, hey, could I count on you to repeat these samples, or if this other lab can't do it, could you please do it? This is tragic that we can't, as scientists, get any of our fellow colleagues, scientists, to even investigate this stuff. Basic science, basic safety studies, shedding studies. I mean, this should be being done. Biodegradation studies, all of it. Transfection, all of it. Yeah.
Comment question. Even the bad guys have children and grandchildren. It's really hard to imagine. But what I'm wondering is, can you give Norma a couple of samples of the 3-minute testimony that give us some framework so that we could actually do it and be effective?
Yeah, so what you do is you turn over your 3 minutes to a single person. So 20 of you get together and you're allowed 3-minute testimony that you turn over to a single person on your behalf. That's the most effective way. You can also do 3-minute testimony of your own if you feel comfortable on the subject matter, because we've had a lot of people do that. A good example of some of the talks that we give, I need to give you the Washington County talk. So we'll have Dr. McCullough, Kevin McKernan, Dr. Corey, Ryan Cole, Dr. Cole, will all speak together on a forum to your counselors. Most of them Zoom in. In the beginning, we did it in person, but it was too hard with everybody's schedules. So we will Zoom in. If you can arrange that, and I can show you through what's been done through Washington County through the brilliant Laura Desmarais. She's the person who introduced the doctrine of the lesser magistrates, and that is, we saw right away that it wasn't working from the top down, as in the people that are involved in this and have gotten some kind of deal to like sweep it under the rug and not tell the people the truth are not the ones that you're going to be able to go to stop it. So you have to stop it at the grassroots level. You have to stop it at your community level. You have to convince your sheriff, your police deputies not to arrest you if you don't wear a mask. You have to keep or let people know what's going on in the communities to save your communities, to have a good food source, to have chickens that have not been vaccinated, share eggs, all of these things. We're going to have to start doing on a community level. Oh, Idaho, Washington County, Idaho. Yes. No, it's wethepeople50.com. It's not there. It may be undergoing site maintenance. Hold on. I'm sorry, Suzanne. Okay. Oh, it's there. Yep. And just we have the same. So we chose our logo before Peter chose his logo. So we have the same logo, but we have. Yep. We're not affiliated with that, although Dr. McCullough is affiliated with helping us to try to stop the shots. So you'll see if you go to talks in here, you'll see there's several of my talks, my colleagues' talks.
Is Ron Johnson still helping a lot?
Ron Johnson is still having forums and is still helping us. He's speaking out.
That's great.
Massey is helping on the food side and the agricultural side. But there's really not many. I guess you guys probably know that both Republicans and Democrats are involved in all this.
Yeah, it's both sides.
Yeah. You know that Doge is doing a great job in showing where a lot of the money has gone.
Yeah. And it's going to be more too.
Yeah. So who has the Doge tracker on their phone? All right. Okay, so are there any other questions? Ask anything. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
What are the effects of only one dose, and if there is anything to do to
The effects of just one dose. So there is a site. I'm going to give you a couple different resources. One, the human body is amazing. Like we can be extremely strong. So if they don't have side effects, notable side effects now, they may be out of the woods with just one shot. They can take nattokinase and serrapeptidase for the blood clotting. Nattokinase is a enzyme from fermented soybeans.
person, I believe, was taking bromelain.
Or bromelain. Okay,
And
that's another
nattokinase.
enzyme from pineapple. Yeah, and yeah, you can take both. You can go on the flccc.com. You can go to howbadismybatch.com. There was huge batch variability between these shots. So if you go to howbadismybatch.com, yeah, go to that, put in the manufacturer and the batch number, and you can see how many adverse reactions and how many deaths are associated with that particular batch. If you go to openvares.com, the address I gave you before, there's a whole list on the side that shows with one shot, like in the different parameters, such as myocarditis or mortality or cardiac with one shot, 2 shot, 3 shot. So it shows different colors for people that have had, more than one shot. And again, if you've just received one and your family member did not have any noticeable side effects, I would encourage getting a cardiac screening, especially if they're a younger person or any age. If you've had any of these shots, you should go get a cardiac screening, get your troponin measured. I understand that one of the doctors here is doing that testing. Definitely have a cardiac screen done because myocarditis is caused by these shots. And you can have what they call subclinical myocarditis, where you're damaging your heart, but you don't know it until you fall over dead. Mm-hmm. Optic stroke, optic neuritis, yeah. So that's a side effect of any vaccines that you take. But it was a particular side effect of the COVID shots as well because they cause blood clotting.
Statement back here in the back. Right here. I'm
sorry.
standing.
Okay.
On the nattokinase, you mentioned that.
Mm-hmm.
You got to make sure you're not allergic to soy. Plus, there's a couple clinical reports out that the effectiveness of the nattokinase is only good in large quantities. So a regular dose you may not be allergic to, but much higher dose that's effective in the arteries, you could be allergic to. So you got to be careful.
Well, yeah, I think you have to be careful with any supplements that you take. These are over-the-counter supplements, but you can also use alternatives like bromelain. Like she said, you can use bromelain. Serrapeptidase is another one that's often combined with nattokinase in order to improve its effectiveness at a lower dose, as you mentioned. Lumbrokinase, made from earthworm casings, is also a very potent anti-clotting agent. You have to be careful if you have any kind of, blood thinning issues or you take aspirin, if you not to take these in excessive quantities. You should be under the guidance of one of the doctors that deals with these COVID injuries. Again, the gentleman that was sitting right here, and Dr. Lehman, and you, right? And Anne, apparently they treat COVID vaccine patients all the time. And also probably COVID patients, because COVID itself did cause some blood clotting as well.
So,
Freedoctor.com, because I have had friends there whose doctors would not give them ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, you can any of flccc.com, or I go through a. Are you filming this? Don't film this.
Uh-oh. So while we're cutting the line here, I'm just going to step in from the tech booth. I'm going to get one question. Are you familiar with the Wellness Company?
Yes, that's what Dr. McCullough's in. Yeah.
Awesome. So the spike protein detox, is that a relatively effective protocol?
They say it is. They say it's working great. I think you have to, try it out yourself if you're vaccine injured to know.
Uses ivermectin and naltrexone for long time.
So I would just say if you took one or more of the vaccines,
just one,
try them, and you're feeling badly, to just try these protocols to see. I would definitely go get a full cardiac screen if you've taken these vaccines. And now there's a company called Emodia. I should have given you the link for that. It's a new German startup company that's offering all kinds of tests for spike protein levels and antibodies to different autoantibodies that are associated with the COVID vaccines and things like that.
Okay.
It's called Emodia.
Miss Janci.
GmbH.
Miss Janci, right here. We're going to take one more question back here. Here. We're going to
Again,
take
it's
one more.
back behind.
Yeah, I know. We're going to take one more question, but it's after 9:00, and
Oh, gosh.
I want to be able
Time
to.
flies.
No, it's fine. I just want to be able to dismiss those people that want to go.
Sure.
But we're going to take one more question because we would like to get some pictures with you.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And you guys can email me to anytime, and I can give you my phone number. I'm not opposed to that. Just text me though, instead of call. Say, hey, I have a question, or it's no problem.
have you heard of the WestonPriceFoundation.org?
I have, yes.
So I'm not promoting, but I've been working with them for a long time. And we have chapters in Houston, and they publish a lot about these vaccines and about COVID and stuff. And they're very, very, very well documented cases and information. And there was a gentleman here that was talking about vaccines, and they've done research on the childhood vaccines. And these children that I see when I go to the conferences, they all drink raw milk, they drink the grass-fed beef and all that, and they're very, very healthy, and none of them are vaccinated.
Yeah. What was your question?
Sorry, I didn't. I'll ask you later.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I don't know a ton about the Western Price Foundation, but if they're showcasing any of the doctors that we've talked about, all these docs are doing it for the right reasons. It's cost many of us our livelihoods. My clientele has dropped tremendously because the first thing anyone does when I give a deposition is pull up, the 5 articles that have been written by Thomson Reuters and AFP Fact Check and Politico saying that I don't know what I'm talking about, and that these vaccines don't cause miscarriage, and there's not a reproductive problem, and they're not gene therapies, and just lies. And so it's very difficult to defend.
All you need to do is talk to some of the OB nurses in the OB wing, and they can tell you exactly what's taking place there.
Yeah. So many of us are in that position where a lot of the doctors have been fired. Dr. John Witcher, who ran for governor of Mississippi, he and his wife Brooke are just lovely people. And Ryan Cole, he's trying to start up some pathology private, things as well. Yep. But you know what, integrity is more important than any of those things. And I just could not, I could not be in my colleagues' shoes that stuck their head in the sand, the ones that knew and didn't say anything. How do you live with yourself? How do you go to sleep at night? How do you face yourself? I mean, there is more, we have a lot more to answer than just what we do here, you know.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Anyway,
you know,
thank you for listening.
this is fabulous. She is fabulous. We've learned a lot. We will have the information. If you do want to go, you know, you are dismissed. We appreciate you coming, but if you want to stay around, I'm sure she will answer some more questions.